Welcome to 7 Skills for the Future podcast. My name is Emma Sue Prince, and this podcast is based on the internationally selling book by the same name. This book focuses on 7 important skills. They are adaptability, critical thinking, empathy, integrity, being proactive, being optimistic, and being resilient. And this podcast is all about how you can bring these skills into your everyday life so that you are living a life full of happiness, full of purpose, great relationships, doing work that you love, and just really getting the most out of life. Welcome back to 7 Skills for the Future podcast. My name is Emma Sue Prince, and I'm joined by my producer, James.
Hi, Emma Sue, and hello, everyone. So in today's episode, we have an interview. Who have you been speaking to this time, Emma Sue?
Yeah, we have a great interview with Alex Soojung-Kim Pang. And Alex is a Silicon Valley futurist and a consultant, and he's the author of 2 great books. So the first book is Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, and his latest book, Shorter, How Working Less Will Revolutionise the Way Your Company Gets Things Done. So I was really interested to talk to him because I quote from his book Rest and reference his work in several chapters in the book, 7 Skills for the Future book, especially critical thinking and empathy. So I was very lucky to be able to interview him. He was in London to promote his new book. And he works with an amazing array of companies. So from Shakespeare's Globe to Googleplex and with governments and Fortune 500 companies. So I know our listeners will just love this interview.
Sounds great. So what can our listeners expect to hear from the interview?
Well, there was so much to talk about. We split the interview into 2 parts. There's so much food for thought and actually proof that working less hours and manipulating your working week does actually lead to much better balance and better health and great ideas and ultimately happiness. So in this first part, we talk about what he's up to in London and how he's promoting his book Shorter. And we talk about the fact that people are working really long hours these days and they sort of feel they have to work these long hours. So Alex talks about how we can manipulate our working week and our day to have a shorter, much more productive and focused work. So we talk about the impact of changing to a 4-day week and what that actually means and some of the practicalities, because he's actually talking about companies completely shutting down for 1 day a week, but people are still being paid the same. And so, it's really interesting how companies do that. And we also talk about my husband, who has started taking Fridays off, but actually really isn't, and how that's quite a common thing, with people saying, yes, I do a 4-day week, but they don't really.
Great. Okay, so let's listen to the interview.
Yeah, let's go for it. So I am delighted to welcome Alex Pang to the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So great to have you with us in London. So you're here in London. Tell us about your trip and what you're up to.
So I have a new book coming out in a couple of weeks about companies that have moved to 4-day work weeks without cutting salaries or sacrificing productivity or profitability. So it explains how they do that and sort of why it's a good thing for everybody, for workers, for leaders, for companies, and for the world. And so, I'm over here talking about that and enjoying the London weather and London traffic. So
good, great. So I have read Rest, your previous book, and Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, which I love. So could you first of all tell our listeners more about the role of rest and how it can help with our productivity levels?
Right. So the book looks at the lives of famous scientists and writers and composers and other or creative types, and looks at the hidden role that what I call deliberate rest. So things like exercise, going for walks after work, serious hobbies, the role that those play in helping us be more creative day to day, but also having longer, more interesting, more creative lives. And I started this book because I saw this paradox in the kind of lives of really creative people, which is that these often were people who would organize their entire lives around their work, it seemed, right? Charles Darwin moved from London to the village of Down so that he could escape the distractions of scientific life here. But they didn't spend their whole day working. Instead, what they did was organize their days so that they had several hours, usually about 4 or 5 hours, of really intensive, highly focused work. And then they also spent almost as much time engaged in what looked like unproductive leisure activities. All right. Darwin actually built a walking path on the edge of his property where he would go and spend as much time per day as he did in the laboratory or in his study. And I was intrigued by this because, of course, we've grown up in a world in which we take sort of overwork for granted. Not only is it a fact of life, it's almost kind of a badge of honor. And it struck me that this was, I wanted to understand how it was that people like Stephen King or Beethoven or Nobel Prize winners could get so much done while apparently working far less than we do. And what I found was that there's work that's been done in neuroscience and the psychology of creativity that shows that periods of rest not only provide time to recover the mental and physical energy that we spend working, but they also provide a kind of ground for our creative subconscious to explore ideas, to turn over unsolved problems, and to often come up with answers. We have a very, this is a process that, we often see in our everyday lives where, you're trying to remember the name of the actor who was in that movie and that other thing, and you can't, but 2 minutes later, while you're doing something else, the name pops into your head. That's the default mode network, these parts of the brain that switch on when we're apparently kind of not thinking at all, continuing to work on problems without us. And so what these people are doing is sort of designing their days to maximize the amount of time that they have both for really highly productive focused work, but also for this kind of creative mind wandering. And so that explained how it was that they were able to, sort of get so much done while apparently working a lot less than we think is necessary for those kinds of achievements.
But I mean, we've really lost touch with that kind of way of living, working. I mean, everybody's just working such long, crazy hours, and it's almost like we feel like I've got to work more,
right,
to get more done,
right. So, and I think first off, there are all kinds of interlocking reasons that we now embrace this kind of cult of overwork, right? And we kind of grow up with it. We have, our models of success are no longer people who, start in the mailroom and work their way up the company, do their time, pay their dues, and finally reach the top, right? Success now is something that happens when you're young, before your technical skills or become obsolete or the market changes, and which come as a result of a combination of good timing and enormous amounts of labor. I think it's also the case that the fact that we can carry our offices around in our pockets, that technologies allow us to be always on and always connected, have translated from this being an option to being essentially a kind of daily requirement. The fact that we can check our email, at the dinner table creates an imperative to do so. And then I think that for professionals, for people who are at the kind of top of the economic ladder, long hours become a way of justifying outsized rewards, while for people who are in far more precarious positions, long hours are simply a necessity to avoid, redundancy or to keep your job. And then finally, in a service economy, it's a lot harder to know when to stop, right? You don't have a factory bell, that goes off at the end of the day. You don't come in from the fields when the sun goes down. There's always one more thing to be done or a little bit more that you could do to make your work a little bit better. And so I think all of that together combines to create a world in which overwork becomes normalized. And we see it as both the key to success for some of us and unavoidable for everybody else.
So how do we begin to change that?
Right. So, this is something that this has been the subject both of Rest and my latest book. And I think that, so at the individual level, people who have control over their schedules, can do a few things. And one is, I think, redesigning their days to maximize the amount of focus time that they have, right? I think that there are studies that show that in offices we lose about 2 hours a day of productive time to multitasking, to meetings, to interruptions. And so if you can eliminate that, then you suddenly go a long way to being able to shorten your workday. I think for people, and then layering those periods of intensive work with periods immediately thereafter of active rest is a really good way of both recharging your batteries, but also allowing your creative subconscious to keep working on problems that have eluded your conscious solution. Practicing that also makes you better at it. We think of rest and creativity as either natural things or as things that are difficult to control, but they're actually both things that we can learn to get better at. It's a bit like when you're a kid and you're learning a language, right? Nobody sits down and teaches you verbs, nouns, vocabulary. You just pick it up. Our brains are really well designed for that kind of thing. And it's true even for, apparently mysterious, elusive things like having moments of insight. For people who are in kinds of jobs where you don't have as much control over your time, what I see are a lot more investment in both in detachment in the evenings and weekends. So trying to stay away from email, having other kinds of hobbies and things that provide a break. And then also taking vacations really seriously. There are studies that have charted the lives of thousands of people over decades, right? These big longitudinal studies that have found that people who take regular vacations are happier at work, they're happier with their lives, they're more productive, they have more successful careers, and they are healthier as they age than people who don't. And so, certainly in America, we have this terrible problem with people not taking vacations. We have this sense that this is in some way, we're going to fall behind or, we're kind of being disloyal to the company. But over the long run, that's actually essential for maintaining our ability to work not just this year, but over the course of our lives. I think I think that recognizing the value of rest, recognizing that rest is not like a competitor to work, but when structured properly, helps us work better, helps us be more creative, provides time both for recovery and for new insights. That all of these things are important for us to to learn and to act upon. At the same time, we live in a world that is incredibly good at capturing and commodifying our attention, at requiring us to stay late, at making increasing demands on us as professionals, as workers, as colleagues, as parents, as spouses. And so I think we need to recognize that there are these big structural things that make it really hard for us to find more rest in our lives. And the companies that I look at in short order are solving this problem by actually by both shortening the work week, but also adopting a bunch of the things that I talk about in rest. One of the most important things that creative agencies and software companies and other kinds of knowledge work enterprises do when shortening their weeks is they kind of redesign the workday to give people those periods of intensive focused work where you don't have to talk to colleagues, you don't have to answer the phone or email. It's perfectly okay to be kind of antisocial so that you can get stuff done. And what they find is that when you organize the day that way, that companies are perfectly capable of getting done in 4 days what used to take 5 or more. And so taking this more mindful, more structured attitude toward their work gives them the ability to, close up on Thursday afternoon or close by 2 or 3 p.m. and give people more time for family, more time for rest, more time for other things that make their lives better. So I think that combination of the individual things when you can act upon them, doing what you're able to when you have a job that doesn't allow you to have a lot of control over your time is still a valuable thing. And then seeing if there are ways that you and your friends or colleagues or bosses can implement at work these changes so that one can be more effective in less time, and in essence change the structures that keep us from being able to rest. I think those are all of that together are things that turn out to be available to us.
Yeah, so it's recognizing on an individual level and noticing the impact of that, and then structurally and an organization. So do organizations report that the impact of this and what difference it makes?
Yeah. So, I've been looking at companies all over the world. Here in the UK, Scandinavia, the US, Australia, also Japan and Korea, interestingly. 2 countries who both have words for working yourself to death, right? This is enough of a problem so that you have to invent a specific word for it. And so this is a movement that is global. It's one that you see in a variety of industries, ranging from creative services to nursing homes. There's a car dealership in Maryland that's moved to 4-day weeks. You have hospitals. There's even a couple medical schools in the United States whose curricula now operate on 4-day weeks. So it's a really wide range of places. So what do they find? They find, first of all, that they can be as productive in 4 days as in 5, that they are just as profitable, if not more so. Clients, interestingly, do not abandon them. This is always a big worry, right? That you become so accustomed to the idea that you've got to be always responsive when a client calls, that the idea of not doing that seems like the earth is going to crash into the sun. It turns out, though, for most clients, so long as you continue to do the same quality of work and you meet your schedules, they're perfectly fine with it. But they themselves also are dealing with the same kinds of problems with work-life balance, with recruitment and retention. And so seeing And it's one thing to hear about like a hospital in Scandinavia doing it, right? I don't know about the situation here, but in the States, when you talk about companies in Sweden, you might as well be talking about the elves in Middle-earth, right? Or it's like this beautiful place that's completely alien and kind of distant and unapproachable. On the other hand, when it's a company that you've been working with, whose culture you understand, who kind of understand how you work, you think, if they can do it, maybe there are things here that I can learn as well. So all of those things turn out to be positives. And then but companies also talk about becoming better places to work, right? Recruitment goes way up, not surprisingly. Retention also goes up, even in industries where job hopping is the norm. And of course, people who are working there report being happier, they have better work-life balance, they have more time for exercise, for taking care of themselves and for others. And interestingly, when they measure this, they also report feeling like they have more time to get stuff done. Even when they've knocked a day off the work week, the fact that you are more focused, that everyone is more attentive to how time is spent. They're more respectful of each other's time and need for attention. All of that sort of kind of opens up so much time in people's schedules that you actually have the psychological sense that you have more time to get stuff done rather than less. So, and I will say there are a couple places that I know have tried this and it hasn't worked out for them. But for the overwhelming majority, if they plan the trials carefully, you involve everyone, you have a kind of experimental mindset that says you're going to try a whole bunch of different things. Some of them are going to work, you adopt those. Some of them aren't, you get rid of them, and you kind of iterate and you figure out what works for you, what works for your group, for your company. Doing that lets companies figure out in generally a few weeks how it is that they're going to be able to make this work for themselves, for their work, for their clients, and then make it a permanent thing. So shorter, the title of your book, and shorter as in a shorter working week. That means completely shutting shop on Fridays. Right. So, most of the companies I study work Monday through Thursday. There are, of course, some other variations. Some of them do 6-hour days rather than and they do that 5 days a week. Some of them close on Wednesdays. So, but most of them are in industries where Friday is kind of a quieter day anyway, so it's a sort of natural one to cut from the calendar.
And people are on the same salaries as full-time?
Salaries do not go down. Absolutely not.
Okay, so Fridays here are often, dress down Friday, or people work from home. And my husband has started to take Fridays off, except he doesn't. He works from home. So this is really, to be very clear, this is about actually not working on that Friday, doing other things.
Yes, exactly. And there are a few companies, particularly software companies or tech companies, that for whom the Friday is more for kind of professional development than just, or going to the gym. But these are companies where, in the software industry, there is a long tradition of people being self-trained. There's a lot of tinkering with new programming languages or technologies or stuff. And so people really like to do that. And there is a big difference between just playing around with stuff like in your garage versus sitting at your desk trying to, knock one more thing off, off the software development to-do list. Yeah. Psychologically, those things are completely different. But, that playing around in the garage does often help you develop skills, technical abilities that you later can, put to use at work. However, for most of these companies, the idea is that this extra day off is distinctly different from work, right? So you're not expected to answer email. You're not expected to be, sort of present electronically or physically in the office. Even if you're doing stuff that is that is kind of professionally related, you don't expect there to be a direct payoff, and you get to choose what kind of development that is, what that looks like, and how you go about pursuing it. It's entirely up to you. So that's what those days look like.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the 7 Skills for the Future podcast. You can find all of our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere where podcasts can be found. If you want to make sure that every new episode ends up on your phone, all you need to do is hit the subscribe button. And while you're there, why not give us a 5-star review so more people can find out about the show? If you'd like to stay in touch or send in one of your questions for Emma Sue, then go to Unimenta on Twitter, 7 Skills for the Future on Instagram, or at unimenta.com. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, there's the book, 7 Skills for the Future, available at booksellers everywhere.